The Dark Blood Covenant. Chapter 2, Holy Warriors. Ishal stood before a mirror looking at the stranger staring back at him. The bright red curls had given way to inky black and his skin looked as if it had never been touched by the sun. It was not completely inhuman. Until he focused on his eyes. The golden glow marking the external changes to his body almost dramatic as the internal ones. He didn't like it. The Holy Temple of Ceri-Lersa had sent her best fighters down upon the region in response to the demon army that had been raiding this section of land. They had caught up to them in Ellistown, not soon enough for Triali. Ishal's head lowered and his hand raised to his eyes. He tried to push back his tears. The death of his son left his body heavy, sinking to the floor under the strain of his loss. He had not yet heard of Laramie's fate. The Holy Warrior and his army had locked him in this room until they could deal with him properly. The door was opened, but lost in his thoughts Ishal did not move. A large man in a full set of battle-stained armor entered. He turned, holding the door so that Laramie could follow behind. She took hesitant steps. She carefully surveyed the room until her eyes moved over to the man on the floor. The large brown eyes opened wide. Despite the obvious changes, she knew him instantly. Laramie rushed over, dropping next to her husband. Ishal. She threw her arms around him. The tears flowing over her face. Relief in finding him alive. A hand brushed over his face and pulled him to her chest. She rested her cheek against the black hair. What happened to you? Ishal reached up and placed a hand on Laramie's shoulder. The movement was weak and shaking. His eyes full of tears, as he looked up to her beloved face. I lost him, Laramie. Triali was in my arms, and then he was gone. I failed you. The torment that came to her eyes told Ishal that she knew exactly what he was talking about. I was the one who lost him, Ishal. He should never have been out of my sight. Laramie touched her forehead to Ishal's. It was a tender gesture exchanged between them. The shared pain of their loss so profound they both needed the soothing contact with each other. The other children were so happy playing outside. Mrs. Hull offered to watch over him, and I was so busy. I am sorry, Ishal. The tears began to fall, coming in streaming cascades. She started to shake. The relief of finding Ishal alive was as great as her sorrow at Triali's death. You have my compassion for your loss. The Holy Warrior made his presence known. Not that he would have been easy to ignore for long. He was an extremely large man, and he filled the room with his mere presence. If it's of any consolation, the boy's body is being well tended to by my men. I apologize for having to detain you in this matter. Ishal took Laramie's hand in his. Unfortunately, I can understand why. I do look quite suspicious as I am now. Lifting his face, and allowing Laramie to look at him in her own time. My wife will want to know what happened to me. It is probably the same question on everyone's mind as well. I have already gotten several reports from my men. They question the townspeople who were in the square. I commend you on your efforts to stand against Hirith's minions. It is not common to hear such bravery about amongst the peasantry. Bravery or stupidity? I am no longer sure of my actions. It cost me much. Ishal scowled bitterly at the words. The Holy Warrior did not argue with Ishal's sentiments. He walked to the table in the room and pulled his sword from his sheath, setting the gleaming blade down upon the light wooden surface. Then pulling out one of the chairs that had been brought in for their use. Please join me. There is much I want to know from you about today's events. Ishal rose from the floor. Leaning over, he gently eased his wife to her feet. I will speak of it with you, but I will not be able to talk before her. Ishal. Laramie gasped and turned her eyes on him. He could see that she did not want to leave his side. Having just been reunited, Ishal could understand the feeling completely. I am sorry to be so weak before you, Laramie. Ishal placed his hands on her arms and pulled her close. The anger I have at Triali's passing is not something I want to expose you to. I will speak with you privately about it later. When I have had time to adjust and calm my emotions. Laramie swallowed back her tears, forcing them from her eyes. She gave a slow nod, trying to respect Ishal's feelings on the matter. If the situation was different, she may have given him more of a fight over his decision. But Ishal's physical change made it clear he had endured something horrible. It was probably best to allow him his way in this, rather than cause a rift between them with stubbornness. I will wait for you in our room. She looked to the holy warrior sitting quietly at the table. If you will excuse me, sir, I will have one of my men escort you. He rose, and moved to the door. It took no more than the opening of it and a wave of his hand, to bring a soldier forward. Laramie turned and cast one more look at her husband as she moved from the room. She locked eyes with him, before the door shut and blocked him from her sight. Ishal watched the man move back to the table. The ease of his movements in such heavy armor was telling. This one had spent most of his days in battle gear. But when the holy warrior pulled the writing instrument into his hand, that too seemed a comfortable motion. A battle-born squalor? Unlikely. Sitting back in his seat, the man tilted his head to the free chair on the other end of the table. Feel free to sit, sir. I would like your accounting to be thorough. I would rather stand, at the moment. Ishal shook his head, and crossed his arms over his chest. He did not realize he was giving away his distrust. But movements were telling. Especially to a man who interrogated people before. So just who are you anyway? I am called Maccus Thorn, holy warrior of Ceri-Lersa's pillar. He crossed his arms slowly over his chest in similar fashion to Ishal. The large body leaning back in the chair, as bright eyes studied Ishal closer. The information was freely given. An effort to make things simpler between them. If he was waiting for a reaction from Ishal, he was sorely disappointed. A holy warrior. The demons seem to fear you. So I will take it as a good thing. This Maccus fellow smiled and shook his head. He was clearly stunned that Ishal had no idea what a holy warrior was. Where are you from, man? Everyone from the area knows of Ceri-Lersa's pillar and her holy temple. It's the capital city of the kingdom Ceri-Lersa. I know of your goddess and her holy temple, but forgive me for not knowing the hierarchy of this land. My people come from Haven Wind, and I have only recently crossed the borders. I am sorry to disappoint you, sire, but I am merely the seventh son of a lowly farmer. I came here with a land petition for fertile soil in need of tending. That clears your confusion up. Perhaps if you knew what you were facing today, things could have been different. Maccus frowned, a look of disappointment crossing his face. How so? Maccus sighed. I would expect you would have ran with the other townsfolk. Ishal's eyes flared with an unholy golden light. He was insulted by the insinuation that he would have turned tail and fled. Then you expect wrong. My family was in this damnable place. How could I have just left them here knowing creatures like that were openly attacking? To save myself, perhaps? It may have been your first reaction, but I can assure you, that would never have been the case. It was Maccus's turn to be insulted. The insinuation that a holy warrior would run from anything was preposterous. You may address me as holy warrior or Lord Thorn if you prefer. Maccus slammed his gauntlet-covered hand on the table. A movement that commanded respect for his position. Now that we have that cleared away, what may I call you? You can call me the one who would not roll over to your fancy titles and noble crap. Ishal stalked over to press his hands down on the table. He was near to seeing red in his rage. The emotion of the day too fresh as he leaned in to stare down the holy warrior. Now if you do not mind, I have a son to bury. He was done with this conversation. I am not done with you. So do not attempt to leave this room. Maccus came to his feet. He was used to his large body intimidating others. He did not mean to elect fear, but if he could just continue without physical violence, that would be the preferable result. The reminder this man just lost a child. A stinging reality of the emotion he was dealing with. This was not the sort of situation Maccus enjoyed handling. Pressuring people for information, but the man had been visually changed by the demons into what the Holy Temple called a dark blood. The stories of witnesses had been recorded, many times over. The actual victims of the demons' statements were rare. The demons took their victims away with them, and the fates of those was completely unknown. Even if the Dark Blood managed to escape the kidnapping, they did not fare much better for it. Those having survived the initial attack not guaranteed a healthy outcome. Some suffering the trauma as memory loss. Some cases they were killed by their own people due to the fear of the change the demons had invoked. It was also not uncommon to have them commit suicide in response to the event. This man could hold knowledge to fighting or even defeating Hearth's invasion. But all that would be useless to them if anything happened to him. It was Maccus Thorn's duty to protect the new Dark Blood and see him safely into the care of the Holy Temple. Such was one of the many duties bestowed on the Holy Warriors. "We are not done?" "I say we are." Ishal pulled open the door, but 2 guards blocked his path. Ishal looked back at the Holy Warrior behind him. Displeasure at his detainment plastered on his expression. He was angry and he did not care if the man knew it. Maccus indicated to the chair he had asked Ishal to use before, "Please forgive me, but I cannot allow you to leave just yet. There is important information possibly only you possess." Ishal's answer was to turn a vicious punch into one of the guards' face. He had enough with this detainment. Trying to push past the other guard at the door, Maccus moved like lightning across the room. He lay a hand on Ishal's shoulder. The harsh pull trying to turn the Dark Blood around to look at him. Ishal complied using the momentum to let his fist fly into the Holy Warrior. Maccus stumbled back. A hand on his jaw, stunned at the power of the blow. In truth it felt more like he had been kicked by a horse. Maccus had endured intense training to get where he was. It was a life's work to earn his title. He had fought his way through the ranks of the best fighters their world had to offer. The Dark Blood's punch held the speed, power, and accuracy to rank him up there with them. Coming back up, Maccus knew that if he did not intervene there was no way to stop him. His soldiers just did not possess that kind of ability. As if to prove the truth of those thoughts, more men rushed down the hall to aid in the struggle. Ishal turned on them. The burning pain in his heart ached for such a fight. Insurmountable odds stacked against him made him focus on something other than his empty heart. He wanted to rage. Ishal cleanly dodged the first fist that was thrown at him. He responded with a blow that sent his challenger into the group behind him. They tumbled back in a heap. Ishal stepped forward intending to go into the pile along with them. Maccus caught Ishal around the waist. The 2 men going down in a tumbling struggle for supremacy. Maccus was a larger man. His armor's weight was a distinct advantage in keeping Ishal pinned to the floor. Ishal was more agile, and was able to quickly avoid the other man's attempts to restrain him. Slipping out of Maccus's holds and throwing fierce hits into Maccus's face. Ishal managed to roll on top of the man, pulling back his fist and let it fly. At the last moment Maccus raised his arm to block the blow. Ishal snarled like a monster as he came up against solid armor plating, the aching of his knuckles burning in his mind. Then Maccus twisting his hand around to grab Ishal's wrist and flipping him back to the floor. It was done with such highly trained skill. Maccus did not even have to think of his next move. Fighting styles so ingrained they were instinctual. "Come to your senses, man." Maccus locked his hands in Ishal's shirt and shook him. Still Ishal struggled trying to rise. The Holy Warrior clenched his jaw and a nerve ticked there. He was hating what he was about to do. Summoning up the power of the goddess, he pulled back and let his fist crash over Ishal's face. The mercy of blackness dragging Ishal down from his torment. Maccus heaved great breaths. He dropped the man to the floor. He started to climb wearily to his feet. One of his soldiers rushed forward, offering a hand to help him up. "Lord Thorn, is the man possessed?" The question was in everyone's mind. They stood wary, all fearing that any moment the demon would awaken. After all, he had given the most powerful holy warrior in their group a more than decent fight. Compiled with the fact that less than an hour ago he had been fighting off a demonic general single-handed. A feat that had left many men before him in early graves. Maccus shook his head with irritation. He understood the reasoning behind the man's words, but it did not serve to placate him. "Hold your tongue. The poor fellow just lost a child. He is mad with grief. Turning to his men, he sighed, "Take him to a bed. Make sure to shackle him, hands and feet. I want him restrained so that even I could not break free of it." The large shoulders dropped in bitter disappointment. Had he not tried to avoid physical aggression from the start? Still he had ended up coming to blows with the dark blood. It did not bode well. Moving back into the room and slamming the door behind him, the men in the hall looking over to Ishal and then to each other, none wanting to be the one to carry out their holy warrior's order. They were fearing this demon now. Had seen what he could do against the highly respected Maccus Thorn. Should he truly turn on them, no one in the room believed they would survive it.